I'm Dwight Wagenius, Community Minister at Mayflower UCC in Minneapolis, and I'm here as spokesperson for the National Task Force on Electrification. We're reaching out to all conferences about the General Synod Electrification Resolution. We tell everyone we talk to go to Rewiring America as a basic and comprehensive resource on electrification. It's the nation's leading electrification nonprofit. We're pleased today to have as our speaker Cora Wyent, Senior Director of Research at Rewiring America. At that place, she is conducting research and analysis to make rapid electrification of everything in the economy. Prior to Rewiring America, Cora completed her PhD in physics at Caltech, where she studied new materials for ultra-thin solar cells and performed techno-economic analysis of new photovoltaic and carbon capture technologies. She got excited about electrification as a cost-effective, job-creating, and equitable climate solution through representing the Sunrise Movement Los Angeles on the SoCal Building Electrification Coalition. Thank you so much for being here, Cora. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction, Dwight, and thank you all so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to be here and to talk a bit about electrifying our homes and electrifying our churches. So I will pull up my slides. Okay, and then let me get this so I can see more of you. Awesome. Can you all see the slides?
Yes.
Great. So to start with a statement of why electrification is so important, this is a statistic that we really like to use, which is that 42% of our energy-related emissions in the US come from decisions that we make around the kitchen table. So this includes what car we drive, how we heat our houses and how we heat our water, how we cook our food, how we dry our clothes, and where our electricity comes from. And electrification is really the solution to cleaning up this 42% of our national emissions, because once we have clean electricity on the grid, which is happening more and more each year, and once we have electric appliances in all of our homes that can take advantage of our clean electricity, that's how we get decarbonization. So I wanted to start a little bit by what we're talking about when we talk about electrification or electrifying everything, and really what appliances we're talking about in our homes. And one thing we like to say is that climate action historically has seemed to be many small decisions. So, you know, do I use a straw? Do I not use a straw? Do I bring my bags to the grocery store? Do I recycle? Do I compost? And all of those things are really important and do matter, but the impact of electrification is so large that what really matters are 5 big decisions that you make about the appliances in your home. So I'm going to talk about what each of those appliances are, plus a bonus 6 appliance too. So when we're talking about the key technologies for electrification, the first is a heat pump. This is a single piece of equipment that can replace both your air conditioning and your heating system. It's 3 times more efficient than a fossil fuel or an electric furnace. And this technology is really amazing because it works by moving heat from outside your home to inside your home in the winter, and moving heat from inside your home to outside your home in the summer. And that's how you get heating and cooling. We installed one on our roof last November because our furnace dies, and it's been amazing. It's kept us warm in the summer, and it's kept us cool in the summer, kept us warm in the winter, which has been especially important with the heat these past few days. The next key technology here is a heat pump water heater. So this uses the exact same heat pump technology, which works by moving heat rather than creating it. And it's 3 times more efficient than a fossil fuel water heater, but still gives you all the hot water that you need in your home. The next technology here is an induction stove. And this is a stove that uses electricity, but It's much better than a traditional electric stove that you're used to that might have like a red coil. Typical or traditional electric stoves work by heating up the surface and then transferring heat to the pots and pans and to the food. But induction actually works by heating up the pots and pans themselves, which is a much more efficient way of cooking. And it's a really awesome technology. It's fast, it's easy to clean, it doesn't create as much waste heat, so your kitchen stays cooler, and the handles of your pots and pans stay cooler too. That's an additional benefit that I didn't really realize until we got induction ourselves. And it won't pollute your home with the emissions that you get from a gas stove. We also, little personal anecdote here is that many of my fossil fuel appliances just happened to die last fall in our home. So we installed an induction stove and an electric dryer and a heat pump on our roof. And my wife was joking that I was sabotaging our gas appliances, but I promise I wasn't. It was just coincidence that they all died at once and we got to electrify. Then this next technology is a heat pump dryer, uses that same magical heat pump technology. It's 3 times more efficient than a fossil fuel dryer, and no venting is needed. So it's also a great solution for apartments or small spaces. And then the final technology of those big 5 decisions I mentioned is an EV, which I imagine folks are familiar with. No more trips to the gas station and more fun to drive. And then finally, there's this bonus technology of rooftop solar, if it's the right technology for your area to power your home with the sun. So next, I want to talk a little bit about the benefits of electrification. And I know this is the climate assembly, so the climate benefits are really important, but for getting everyone in the country on board with going electric, all of the other benefits like the health benefits, the fact that these technologies just work better, and the bill savings that you see are also really important ways to convince people to go electric. So the average household could save about $1,700 a year on their energy bills if they electrified their home and their driving. So that's a significant amount of money that can go back to what a family needs, whether that's food, whether that's rent, or making the mortgage payments. And I'll talk about the benefits of each of those technologies I mentioned. So a heat pump on average across the US saves about $400 a year, and it reduces emissions by about 3 tons. But for certain types of home heating, like if you're currently heating your home with electric furnaces or electric resistance baseboards or propane or fuel oil, the savings can be much, much greater from a heat pump, and many homes can save over $1,000 a year. Heat pump water heaters give you an annual savings of about $140 on your energy bills and an annual emissions reduction of about 0.5 tons. Induction ranges, the main benefit here isn't really financial or emissions reductions, because cooking is such a small part of our overall home energy use. But a huge benefit of induction ranges, besides the fact that they're just a delight to use, is healthier indoor air, because studies have shown that gas stoves can increase the risk of childhood asthma by 42%. Next up here is a heat pump dryer. And again, some moderate bill savings and emissions reductions, but really the benefit is once you've electrified all of your appliances at once, that's what allows you to stop paying the gas bill altogether, disconnect from the gas grid. And sometimes folks' gas bills can have a pretty high fixed cost that you pay just to stay connected to the gas grid. So there is really a benefit to doing all 4 of these technologies together to get fully off of gas. And then EVs, big bill savers. You can save over $1,000 by not filling up at the pump and instead charging your EV at home, and emissions reductions of about 5 tons. So similar to a heat pump. And then solar, again, big financial savings. And then emissions reductions depend a bit on where you live and how clean the grid is already. But given our projections for what the national grid will do over the next 15 or 20 years, we calculate that you can save about 1.5 tons by going solar. Awesome. So Rewiring America as a whole is really focused on homes and really focused on household electrification. But I did want to talk a little bit about electrifying church buildings too, and some of the things that might be available to make that easier in terms of incentives. So I thought these were some interesting stats on how places of worship across the US generally heat their buildings. The most common way to heat is called a natural gas packaged unit. So this is similar to a gas furnace, but it basically sits typically on the roof of the building. And if you're passing a commercial building and you see kind of like a boxy thing on the roof, that's typically a packaged unit for heating, and it has heating and cooling all in one. And the fact that this is the most common way of heating places of worship is actually pretty promising, because natural gas packaged units have a really pretty simple one-to-one swap for a packaged heat pump. So there are a lot of different technologies for heating, like larger or commercial or non-residential buildings, but these packaged units are actually some of the easiest ones to electrify because there is that one-to-one swap. And then the second most common way of heating places of worship is actually an electric heat pump already, which is awesome. And then propane furnaces are actually pretty high up there too. And that would be, if your church has a propane furnace, that would be there'd be a really clear benefit from electrification, because the bill savings from switching from propane to electric can be so large. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about what some like federal incentives might be that are available to help churches go electric or go solar. One that just got passed through the Inflation Reduction Act is this energy efficient commercial buildings reduction. It's called 179D. This is essentially a tax deduction for retrofits that reduce energy use by at least 25%, up to $5 a square foot. And so a heat pump, because it is such inefficient technology, would give you the significant energy usage reductions that you would need to get this tax credit. And a big benefit here is that you don't have to, churches as nonprofits typically, that's right? You typically won't owe any taxes, but the benefit of this 179D tax deduction is that it can actually be transferred from a non-taxable entity to whoever does the building or designing of the building itself. So you can get that benefit by transferring that tax credit to whoever does the retrofit. And here are the deduction amounts here. So if you're able to hire a contractor who pays their workers prevailing wage, you can get higher deductions per square foot. And basically it goes from a 25% energy deduction where you get $2.50 a square foot to a 50% energy reduction where you get $5 a square foot. So that's where that $5 a square foot maximum deduction comes from. So as far as I know, this would be kind of like the main incentive available to churches who are looking to go electric in their buildings. The second here would be for solar or geothermal or energy storage. This is a clean electricity and investment tax credit, which is called 48. And the Inflation Reduction Act, I believe, made this change that even, again, folks who don't owe taxes, non-taxable entities, can claim this credit directly as a payment called direct pay, rather than having to owe taxes and basically give that up if you don't owe anything. So you can get this 30% tax credit back as a direct payment as a nonprofit entity. And there are also bonuses for projects that use domestic content and projects in low-income communities. That's a little bit, hopefully, unfortunately, it's not totally my strong suit to know about electrifying commercial buildings or churches, but hopefully those are a few things that could help, both that information about federal incentives and then also the tip that if you have propane for heating, you get big bill savings. And if you have one of those packaged units, looks like a boxy things on top of your building that's using gas, it's a pretty simple one-to-one swap for a heat pump. All right, then the last thing I wanted to talk about here is a bit about electrification advice. So some tips and tricks to make going electric easier that apply to both homes and to churches. The first here is the first step to going electric is always to make a plan. Making a plan allows you to see the whole picture of all the projects that you want to complete and make sure that you complete them in the most efficient way possible. So one really clear example of a benefit for this is that if you're electrifying your home or your church too, you need to make sure that you can keep your existing electrical panel and you don't have to pay for an expensive electrical panel upgrade. And if you do projects one at a time, you might eventually find, oh, wow, on the third or fourth project, I accidentally triggered a panel upgrade, even though I could have avoided that by being more efficient with my first upgrade. So it's really important to make a plan first before you get started. And on our website, if you go to homes.rewiringamerica.org, and I'll paste that in the chat at the end, we have a really great tool for homeowners looking to make a plan called our Personal Electrification Planner. And there you can get sort of a project list of the projects to complete, as well as some estimates of the incentives that might be available to you and the bill savings that you would see by completing those projects. And then if you click on the projects themselves, it gives you kind of a step-by-step guide to each one. Second tip is pre-wire to prepare. So this again gets back to the importance of kind of doing all the electrical work up front. So you've got to figure out what your electrical panel size is and whether you'll need to upgrade, and then figure out what electrification projects might require a new circuit to be run in your home or in your church. And typically it's cheaper and easier to run all those circuits at once rather than doing them one at a time. So pre-wiring can be a great way to make sure that when your gas water heater dies, you're ready to do that immediate swap for electric. And we actually didn't do this in my home and suffered the consequences because our electrical panel is set into a stucco wall and they had to break a hole in the wall to put the wiring through it. And then we did one circuit. And then when we had to do the rest of the circuits, they had to break open the stucco again. So definitely there can be some unexpected benefits to really doing your preparation up front by making a plan and then doing the wiring all at once. Third tip here is to find contractors with electrification experience. This can be easier said than done depending on where you live. We spoke with someone who had called over 30 contractors to try to find someone who would recommend a heat pump for her and wouldn't just tell her, oh, heat pumps don't work in this area. There's some funny comments here. Mansplainer said you'd need backup heat, recommended a high efficiency gas burner. So there will be a mixed bag in talking to contractors for sure. In California, where I live, I was fortunate enough to call a couple people who actually encouraged heat pumps and actively discouraged gas furnaces, which is great. And I hope that we'll start seeing that across the country soon. A few tips, though, if you live in an area where it's hard to find those contractors, you can look at state or utility incentive programs and see if they have recommended contractors. One thing to do is just look for contractors that mention heat pumps on their website or where the reviews mention heat pumps. And then finally, you could reach out to heat pump manufacturers to ask them about local installers that they recommend. All right, tip number 4 is get the right size heat pump for your home or for your church. So the thing to ask your contractor to do to make sure this happens is to do a manual J, and that's just a calculation to make sure that your heat pump is sized correctly. If you live in a cold climate, I definitely recommend getting a cold climate heat pump that works down to below 0 degrees Fahrenheit and install electric resistance backup for the coldest days. Final tip, tip number 5, is to really lead with the benefits when talking to friends and family. One thing that we like to say a lot is electric is better. It's really true. Often people just don't know how amazing these technologies are, how fun EVs are to drive, that you really don't have to worry about range anxiety anymore because most of them can go over 300 miles on a charge. People don't know how amazing induction stoves are and that they're just not the same as traditional electric resistance stoves. So this is a video I took of when we first got our induction stove just to show kind of like how precise that temperature control is and how fast it responds. And I posted this on my Instagram and had a lot of people say like, oh wow, I had no idea induction could do this, and had a lot of people who were like, okay, I was actually just talking to a couple friends yesterday who were like, I'm sold on induction because I saw that video of how quickly the water temperature changes. So that's really something that we like to do when talking to other people about electrification is, yes, the climate benefits are there, but really these are just better technologies are all around. So we lead with the benefits. So I'll play this fun video of induction. Awesome. Yeah, so I just like showing that to just show this is not the same as electric resistance where you change it and then it takes 10 minutes for the temperature to increase. It's really that immediate temperature change that people are used to with gas and don't know that they can get with induction. So that's all I've got. I'd love to answer any questions that you all have. And the other thing I wanted to offer too is that if any of you are interested in going on the journey of electrifying your church, we would love to hear about it. So please reach out to me here, and I can connect you to my colleague Alex. And yeah, we'd love to hear how that journey goes, what you experience, and how we can help in that process. So with that, I will stop sharing. And happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thanks so much, Cora. Welcome people to either raise their hand or to write their question in the chat box. As we let people do that, I'll just go ahead and start some things off. I really appreciated your advice for how to deal with contractors. I've experienced that myself in helping family members buy heat pumps, and I guess one of the connected to that would be, what if one is told that heat pumps, it's too cold in this part of the country? Like, is that true? Are there parts of the country where it's too cold, or where it becomes, you're going to be using that electrical kind of backup system like too much and it's going to be too expensive? I mean, address that for us if you could.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think really a lot of when you hear that from contractors, a lot of it is just from people not knowing how advanced the technology has gotten in the past 10 years or so. So there are heat pumps that work down to minus 15 or minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit now. It's pretty incredible. And Maine, I saw someone in the chat talk about a heat pump in Maine, but Maine is actually leading the country in heat pump installations, and it's a pretty cold climate there. So maybe if you are, I think heat pumps will work in any part of the country. And the question is just making sure that you get the right size heat pump and the right type of backup for you. So I would say if you're running into problems with contractors, maybe go the route of like asking a manufacturer what installers they would recommend in your area that will specifically install heat pumps. But yes, they definitely work in all climates and are doing amazing in Maine so far.
Great. Any tips on how to identify those heat pump companies that would be have the top of the line, or the most efficient or affordable heat pumps?
Yeah, I'll give just a couple names of ones that I would reach out to. I think Mitsubishi has really good cold climate heat pumps. Carrier also, Train. Yeah, but I think if you look any heat pump, I probably shouldn't be listing specific companies because I don't want to be picking favorites, but pretty much any heat pump company will have a really good cold climate heat pump these days. So any of those, I think Lennox was the first company to meet the government's cold climate heat pump challenge. So those might be some good places to start.
Great, thanks. We've got a question for you in the chat. What are your thoughts on going from natural gas hot water and heat to heat pump heat and hot water for a church?
Yeah. I think so. Natural gas hot water and heat to heat pump heat and hot water for a church. I think it can be a great idea. And going from natural gas hot water to a heat pump water heater is almost always going to save you money. So I think that's definitely a good transition to make. There are some things to consider when you install a heat pump water heater. Like it has to have enough space around it so that it has room for air exchange. But I think it's absolutely feasible for churches, and I would definitely recommend looking into it. And for heat pump heat, going from natural gas heat to heat pump heat, again, I think it's a really great solution, particularly if you have like a packaged unit for heating where it can really be a one-to-one swap. I'm not sure if there's any follow-up questions I can answer or more specific pieces of making the transition that would be helpful for me to talk about.
Thanks. In terms of, I think a common advice for a lot of our churches is to do energy audits. Would you say anything about why that's important in electrifying and developing a plan and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so when you install a heat pump, you essentially want to be able to install the smallest heat pump possible to heat your space, because that will keep costs down and it will be more energy efficient. So by doing an energy audit and doing any air sealing or insulation that needs to happen first, what you're doing is you're essentially reducing the size of a heat pump that you need to install, which can reduce costs, both to run the heat pump and costs to install the heat pump. And when I mentioned that manual J calculation, which a contractor will do to accurately size the heat pump to your space, the outputs of an energy audit are essentially the inputs to a manual J. So it can be really important to know the results of an energy audit in order to get the right sized heat pump for your home, because or your church too, because say if the church building is more leaky, then you will need a larger heat pump to make up for that. And there's really not a great way of knowing that without doing an energy audit. And typically what they'll do as part of an energy audit is what's called a blower door test, where they essentially put this kind of machine in the door of your home or your church, and they pressurize the air inside your home, and then they see how long it takes for air to essentially leak out. And that's a way of sort of measuring how much leakage there is through the walls, through the windows, through like any cracks in the floor or wherever else there may be points of air leakage. So that blower door test is a really important output of an energy audit that can then be an input of your manual J to size a heat pump accurately.
Thanks. If with any of the appliances that you talked about, is there some issues of people maybe having sticker price shock at first, or are there some things people should be doing to calculate long-term cost advantages to offset maybe sticker price shock? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. So I would definitely recommend checking out the Personal Electrification Planner, and I'll drop the link to that in the chat in a second. And in our Personal Electrification Planner, we estimate what the upfront cost of one of these technologies might be, as well as what the long-term sort of energy bill savings will be. So you can kind of do that calculus of how long it takes to pay off the initial investment in the appliance. So that's a really helpful tool for really being realistic about what the upfront costs are, and then also seeing the benefits that you'll get from paying that amount. I think a couple notes on upfront cost. One is it's important to factor in what you would have otherwise paid to replace your fossil fuel appliances like for like. So when we got a heat pump in the past winter, we calculated, okay, not only how much it would be to replace our furnace, which had already died, but we also would have had to replace our AC soon because it was old. So when you summed up the furnace and the AC, for us, installing a heat pump was actually about the same price as it would have been anyways to replace those other two appliances. And then definitely look into government incentives and rebates because they can be pretty generous in some places. And our personal electrification planner has calculation for those.
Yeah, I'm one of the comments in the chat has me thinking of a particular question. If one is in a place where maybe the grid is feeding you energy that comes from a coal plant or a gas plant, is it just sort of like, oh, electrifying isn't going to be of any benefit to the environment because it's all going to, I'm hooked up to a gas plant or a coal plant. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, so we've done those calculations, and from our calculations, no matter where you are in the country right now, getting a heat pump will provide environmental benefits. It will save carbon, no matter what your grid looks like right now. It's pretty remarkable, and a lot of that is because of that 3x efficiency gain that you get from a heat pump. So even if your heat pump was purely running on gas-fired power plants, you still get this 3x efficiency gain that you don't get with a natural gas furnace from having a heat pump. So from our calculations, it's really, there is a benefit anywhere, regardless of what your grid looks like. And the grid is just getting cleaner and cleaner every year. So that benefit is only going to grow over the next 10 or 15 years as we get more renewables and more solar and wind on the grid.
Thanks. I'm going to encourage people to in the chat, maybe talk about some of the conversations or obstacles you've encountered if you've maybe had these conversations in your church with your property and finance committee. Tell us, what people are saying if you bring up, hey, let's go out to heat pumps, because you're right on the front lines of trying to figure out how do we best sort of communicate that these are really technologies to be shifting towards. And so, Cora, I know you spend a lot of time communicating with the general public about these things. Are there communication tips that you'd have for us as we're, on our property finance committee and we're trying to convince the other members of the committee that we want to go with a heat pump? Are there things that, cases to be made that you found particularly persuasive or effective? What would you recommend to people in that situation?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I touched on it briefly in the presentation, but when talking to just the general public, we really like to we often lead with the benefits that aren't necessarily about climate, like just the benefits of, a heat pump is more efficient technology. It has the potential for bill savings. It'll keep your home at a more comfy and consistent temperature, and then talk about the environmental benefits after that. So I think that's a general public communication advice, is just really talking about like how great these technologies are. I think being on the property finance committee is a bit different, like your audience is a little bit different. So I'm trying to think about specific advice for that. I think one thing to point to is really to think about the long-term effects of a decision to go electric today, because there is a risk that as people do go electric, which we hope happens quickly, that people will be leaving the gas grid, and the cost to keep using gas will go up kind of precipitously if people start exiting the gas grid and you have to pay for the same amount of infrastructure to serve fewer customers. This is like a concept called the utility death spiral. And I think, so one case to make in those sort of property finance committee settings is think not only about what the economics look like today, but think about what they might look like in 15 years when we know that there are all these climate goals across states and then across the federal government. that are causing us to switch off the gas system slowly and will cause it to be more expensive to be connected to the gas system. And really, when you install a technology in a building, you're making a choice that locks you into that decision for the next 15 or 20 years.
Great. I'm just curious to get your perspective and kind of, as you look sort of and see how things are being adopted or not being adopted right now, do you feel that some of the resistance is just sort of a matter of this is new technology and it's a new thing, and change is always sort of like a struggle to something new, or is there some pushback to adoption that's due to kind of cultural world type of things going on? I was most kind of familiar with the induction stoves maybe, but I'm not sure what else is being said out there about other types of appliances. But I mean, what's your sense of kind of what are the challenges out there for adoption?
Yeah, I think the culture war challenges are definitely a piece of it. I've really only seen that with gas stoves. I haven't seen that as much with heat pumps. And I think part of the reason for that is that heat pumps are already incredibly common in parts of the country, especially in the Southeast. So people are familiar with them. They know they're not a foreign technology. A lot of folks have them in their homes. So, but in terms of the gas stove pushback, I think that's part of why we try to lean really heavily on just like the benefits of induction. And I think when you cook with induction, or when you see someone else cook with induction, it really sells itself. And we're not trying to get people to go backwards to like an older, inferior technology to a gas stove. We're asking people to go forwards to something that they're going to be much happier with than they were with their gas stove. So that's how we address that, is really by that leading with the benefits. And then I think in terms of other barriers to adoption, someone mentioned this in the chat, but it is true that it is, for folks switching from gas to a heat pump, that's not going to save you money everywhere in the country right now. I think, speaking to that long-term utility trajectory, I think it will save you money everywhere in the country in 10 years, but I think that's a big barrier to adoption right now, is that the gas to heat pump transition isn't always economical depending on where you live. So I think our approach to that as an organization is to really start with fuels like electric resistance and propane and fuel oil, where the benefits are so clear. And then also natural gas in the areas where it is economic to switch. So places like the Southeast, it's usually economical to switch from gas to a heat pump. And then at the same time that we're like starting with kind of the low hanging fruit for electrifying economically right now, we're working on creating the policy conditions so that electrifying gas is economical everywhere in the future.
Well, I think we have time for two more questions, perhaps. We've got one in the chat, and then maybe we'll close with a policy-related question. So in the chat, question is, are there commercial induction stoves for church kitchens?
Yes, there are commercial induction stoves. There's a case study from Microsoft where they electrified all of their campus kitchens. So that's one resource I would point to for commercial induction stoves. But yes, there definitely are. Yeah.
Thanks. And then, just as a policy related question, to me, kind of the current state of affairs is kind of, I liken to what economists used to call like kind of like the nudge, principle. Like we have incentives and credits and, these things that kind of nudge us in the right direction. I think the challenge that I see is, well, that really relies a lot on individual behavior for people to want to be nudged and to see that there are these nudges out there, right? A lot of us might not be aware that these incentives and rebates and credits exist. And so is there kind of a next step policy wise? Is there something that can take us a little further so that it's not so based on individual decisions? I mean, or is that pretty much the parameters of what we have to work with on that?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, I think the key is getting to a point where it's the obvious decision for everyone to make to replace their current system with a heat pump. And I think the pieces of that are like everyone else is doing it, and it makes sense for me from a cost perspective. So I think the way we have a report on our website called the Pace of Progress report that looks at the way that technology adoption has happened in the past. So adoption of things like cell phones or refrigerators. And there's this essentially this S curve of adoption where you start out slowly and you have the early adopters, and then adoption accelerates as it becomes more commonplace and the market transforms as a whole. And I think we're still in sort of the bottom part of that S curve for a lot of electrification technologies. And I think each nudge is important to like move us along the bottom part of the S curve. But I think what really kicks off mass adoption is when it becomes essentially economical or just the obvious decision to make to go electric. And I think in order to do that, what we need is enough of these like nudge actions to add up so that there are a large number of contractors competing with each other in each area and prices come down, and so that everyone's comfortable with heat pumps, so they're not sort of overcharging because of this like discomfort or I don't know what's going to happen factor. So I think it's about kind of like building the momentum so that we can eventually sort of bring that price down. And yeah, I think there are other policy levers aside from rebates and incentives that we can look into. You know, some states have said some cities have said that all new construction must be electric, and that's really good because then you just avoid putting in any gas infrastructure at all into any new buildings. And then there's also some interesting policies around making sure that any AC that's installed is actually a heat pump, because an AC and a heat pump are exactly the same technology. A heat pump just has something called a reversing valve, where it can switch the direction of the heat flow. So that's another interesting policy solution that's like a little bit less of a nudge and more of a market transformation initiative that would basically require any AC that's sold to be a heat pump.
Right. Was it in Ithaca or Rochester, one of those New York cities where they have one of those, that local legislation that requires that transition, I believe. But yeah, great. Well, I think, to put it in a positive frame, I think, it sounds like with the accumulation of enough nudges, we reach a tipping point where the fossil fuel powered appliances become obsolete. And so I think that's we're on our way. And so thanks. I appreciate that. Well, our time here has come to end for this portion of our Climate Action Assembly. Thank you so much for this terrific presentation. You've given us lots of terrific insights and knowledge on this. And so we will make this available on our resource web pages so that other congregations can learn about this as they, when it dies, electrify, I guess is the saying. So when they reach that point, they'll be able to come here and be like, yes, this is what we need to do next. So we really appreciate your being with us today.